The theater of Pompey, Rome, the Ides of March, 44 BC. A profound silence has fallen over the Senate chamber. But this is not the quiet of peace. It is the hollow, ringing echo left in the wake of murder. On the marble floor, a new, chaotic mosaic is spreading, a dark crimson that stains the foundations of the Republic itself. In the center of the room, at the feet of a statue of his long-dead rival, lies the body of Gaius Julius Caesar. He is not draped in the purple of a triumphant general, nor wearing the laurel crown of a victor. He is shrouded in his own blood, a toga punctured by 23 separate stab wounds. And standing over him are not foreign invaders or hired assassins. They are the nobility of Rome, senators, his peers, his protégés, men he had pardoned in war and promoted in peace. Their hands, their daggers, are slick with the lifeblood of the man who had called them friends. They walked into the Senate this morning as his colleagues. They now stand, stunned and silent, as his killers. This was not a coup launched from outside the gates. It was a self-inflicted wound, carved into the very heart of Roman power. The most powerful man in the world was not toppled by a rival army, but by an assembly of his own allies, and among them, one man whose presence seems to defy all reason, Marcus Junius Brutus, a man praised for his honor, his integrity, a man Caesar had cherished, protected, and loved like a son. His betrayal was the most unthinkable of all. This single act of horrific violence poses the most troubling question in Roman history. How did it come to this? What poison could possibly turn trusted allies into a pack of assassins and a beloved friend into a killer? To find the answer, we must look beyond the bloody daggers and into the complex, fearful hearts of the men who wielded them. The story of Caesar's death is not a simple tale of politics. It is the anatomy of a betrayal. To understand how a friendship could end in murder, you must first understand the man who inspired such fiercely powerful and ultimately fatal emotions. Gaius Julius Caesar was a force of nature, a brilliant military strategist who conquered the vast territory of Gaul, and a political genius who understood the hearts of the common people. When the corrupt and fearful Senate ordered him to disband his army, he made a choice that would change the world forever. He crossed a small river called the Rubicon, a symbolic act of treason, and plunged the Roman world into a bloody civil war. His justification was simple. The die is cast. The war was a clash of titans, pitting Caesar against the old guard of the Republic, led by his former ally, Pompey the Great. When the final, decisive battles were won, Caesar stood as the undisputed master of Rome. In this moment, history held its breath. Roman tradition was clear. The victor would produce a proscription list, a death warrant for every enemy who had stood against him. But Caesar, ever the showman, did something far more radical. He unveiled a revolutionary, almost reckless public policy, clementia, mercy. Instead of executing his defeated foes, he publicly forgave them. Men who had raised armies against him, men who had called for his head, were welcomed back to the city, their property and status restored. It was a masterful political stroke, designed to show he was a healer, not a tyrant. Among the pardoned was the sharp, sullen, and fiercely proud senator, Gaius Cassius Longinus. Cassius would accept Caesar's pardon, but he would never forgive the humiliation of his own defeat. He took the dictator's mercy as an insult, a daily reminder that he lived only by Caesar's permission. But there was one man whose safety was more important to Caesar than any other. A man whose life he held sacred above all others on the battlefield. Marcus Junius Brutus. The bond between them was deep, complex, and the subject of intense gossip in Rome. Brutus was the son of Caesar's most beloved and long-standing mistress, Servilia. The affair had lasted for decades, and the connection was so profound that many whispered Caesar was Brutus's true father. Whether true or not, Caesar treated him as a son. After the decisive Battle of Pharsalus, where Brutus had fought for Pompey's losing side, Caesar's first thoughts were not of victory, but of Brutus's life. He gave a frantic, overriding order to his officers: find Brutus and ensure, at all costs, that he is not harmed. When Brutus was finally brought before him, Caesar's relief was immense. He saw not a conquered enemy, but a cherished son returned from the brink of death. From that moment forward, Caesar's favor was a constant, protective shield around Brutus. He was given the governorship of Cisalpine Gaul, one of the most prestigious posts in the Republic. He was appointed praetor urbanus, the chief judicial magistrate of Rome itself. Caesar was grooming him, placing him at the very center of power. Seeing in Brutus's famously stern and honorable nature the ideal custodian for the future of Rome. And Brutus was no simple opportunist. He was a devoted student of Stoic philosophy, a man who genuinely agonized over morality, ethics, and his duty to the state. His reputation for integrity was his most defining feature. Unlike the bitter Cassius, Brutus's affection for Caesar was real. He admired the man's genius, and he was deeply grateful for his mercy. But he was a man of the Republic, now serving a man who was rapidly becoming its absolute master. This was the conflict that would wage war within his soul. So the stage was set. Rome was at peace, presided over by a dictator who had shown his enemies forgiveness. His inner circle was now a strange and volatile family, a mix of loyal followers and pardoned foes, all bound together by the sheer force of his personality. It was a bond forged in the crucible of war and sealed by an act of grace, and it was about to be shattered by a single, terrifying idea. For a time, the peace held, but the Roman Republic had been a system of shared power for nearly 500 years. The idea of one man holding all authority indefinitely was a poison to its very soul. And soon, Caesar's ambition began to test the limits of his own mercy. In early 40 for BC, the Senate bestowed upon him a new title, one that struck fear into the hearts of the traditionalists: Dictator Perpetua. Dictator for life. It was a step too far. The title of dictator had been a temporary, emergency measure in the past. Making it permanent was a violation of all tradition. It felt monarchical. And then came the flood of other honors, each one chipping away at the foundations of the Republic. A statue of Caesar was placed among those of the ancient kings of Rome. Then another, in the temple of Quirinus, with the inscription to the invincible god. His face, a thing no living Roman had ever done, was minted onto the nation's coins. He was becoming more than a man. He was being made into a living deity, a king in all but name. The tipping point came during the festival of Lupercalia, in front of a massive crowd. Caesar's loyal co-consul, Mark Antony, approached him and attempted to place a royal diadem upon his head. The crowd groaned. Caesar, sensing their disapproval, refused it. Antony offered it again. Caesar refused it again, to the roaring approval of the people. While he played the part of the reluctant hero, the message had been sent. The idea of King Caesar was no longer a secret whisper. It was now a public spectacle. And Gaius Cassius, the pardoned but never pacified enemy, saw his moment. He knew he was too bitter, too personally motivated, to lead a conspiracy on his own. He needed a symbol. He needed a man whose reputation was so unimpeachable that his involvement would transform an act of murder into an act of patriotic duty. He needed Brutus. Cassius began his campaign not with arguments, but with psychological warfare. He preyed on Brutus's deepest pride, his family legacy. He would speak of Brutus's famous ancestor, Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who had expelled the last tyrant king from Rome 5 centuries earlier. Was the blood of that great liberator still flowing in his veins, or had it grown weak? Then, the whispers became a chorus. Anonymous messages began appearing all over the city, all aimed at Brutus. They were etched onto the statue of his great ancestor. They were left on his magistrate's chair in the Senate. Forged to look like pleas from the Roman people, they carried simple, haunting messages. Brutus, you are asleep. You are not the Brutus you think you are. The pressure campaign worked. Brutus was in agony. In his private study, he paced for sleepless nights, the conflict tearing him apart. He loved Caesar, the man who had pardoned him, the man who had acted as a father. But his entire life, his philosophy, his family name, was built upon his duty to the Republic. He began to see Caesar not as the man he was, but as the tyrant he could become. In his mind, the assassination transformed into a preemptive strike, a terrible but necessary sacrifice to prevent a future of servitude for Rome. It was a fatal miscalculation, born of honor and manipulated by fear. He finally summoned Cassius and the other conspirators to his home. He would join them. He would lead them. With Brutus as the noble face of the plot, the conspiracy was no longer a bitter feud. It was now a sacred cause. The conspirators had their soul, and their blade was now aimed directly at the heart of their friend. Understood. We now arrive at the heart of the story. Here is Act 4. This is the longest and most detailed act, the centerpiece of our narrative, depicting the final, tragic moments of Julius Caesar's life. Et tu, Brute, the anatomy of history as greatest betrayal, Act 4. The Ides of March voice over script the morning of March 15th, 40 for BC, dawned heavy and grey. The air over Rome was thick with a sense of impending doom. For the 60 senators in the conspiracy, the moment had come. Nerves were frayed. Daggers were hidden in the folds of their togas. One wrong word, one stray glance, and the entire plot could unravel. For Caesar, the day began with a series of terrifying omens. His wife, Calpurnia, had woken from a violent nightmare, dreaming that their house had collapsed and that she was holding his bleeding, murdered body in her arms. She begged him not to go to the Senate. Then, the priests he ordered to perform a sacrifice reported the most dreadful sign of all. The animal they opened had no heart. It was a sign so dire, so unnatural, that they urged him to postpone all business. Caesar hesitated. He was a man who respected tradition, but he was not a slave to superstition. He could not show fear, as he was carried in his litter towards the theater of Pompey. Where the Senate was meeting, the warnings grew more frantic, more direct. Throngs of people pushed forward, trying to get his attention. On the steps, he saw the soothsayer, Sprinna, the very man who had warned him a month earlier to beware the Ides of March. Feeling confident, Caesar called out to him mockingly, "The Ides of March have come." The old soothsayer replied with a chilling calm, "Aye, Caesar, but not yet gone." Moments later, a man named Artemidorus pushed through the crowd. He was a scholar who had learned of the plot. He thrust a small scroll into Caesar's hand, crying out that it contained a matter of life and death. The scroll was a detailed list, naming every single conspirator and exposing their plan. But in the crush of senators and petitioners, Caesar was distracted. He waved the man away, tucking the scroll into his toga to be read later. The final chance of salvation passed, unread. He entered the Senate chamber and took his seat on his gilded chair. The conspirators, their moment finally at hand, moved in as a group. They approached under the guise of presenting a petition, asking for the pardon of a political exile. It was their pretense to crowd round him, to block him from escape, and to shield their actions from the rest of the Senate. One of the plotters, Tilius Cimber, presented the petition. When Caesar refused, Cimber grabbed his toga at the neck and pulled it down, bearing his shoulder. It was the signal. The first to strike was Publius Casca. He had approached Caesar from behind. Nervous, his hand trembling, he lunged forward, but his blade only grazed Caesar's neck. A shallow, clumsy cut. Caesar whipped around, his eyes wide with shock and fury. He was a soldier, and his instincts took over. He impaled Casca's arm with his stylus, the sharp metal pen used for writing on wax tablets. Vile Casca, he roared. "What is this? Treachery?" Casca screamed to his brother for help, and the scene exploded into pure, savage chaos. The other conspirators drew their daggers and descended on him. This was not a clean, coordinated execution. It was a frenzied, panicked mob attack. The non-conspiring senators, seeing daggers flash, screamed and fled the chamber in terror, trampling each other to escape the unfolding nightmare. Caesar fought back with the fury of a cornered animal, twisting and turning, deflecting blows. But he was one man against dozens. Daggers stabbed at him from all sides. The air filled with the sounds of tearing fabric, grunts of effort, and the sickening thud of blades hitting flesh. In their frenzy, the assassins began wounding each other by mistake. He was still fighting, still trying to live, until his eyes, blurred with pain, locked onto a figure pushing through the mob. A man he recognized above all others, a man he loved. Marcus Junius Brutus, his protégé, his surrogate son, stepped forward, his face a mask of terrible resolve, his own dagger raised. In that instant, all the fight drained out of Caesar. The shock of this one betrayal was more fatal than all the other wounds combined. He stopped resisting. According to the historian Suetonius, he said nothing, but simply pulled the top of his toga over his head, unwilling to let the man he considered his son see the final look of heartbreak and betrayal in his eyes. Other sources say he uttered his last, devastating words, not in Latin, but in the Greek of his youth, a more intimate tongue, kai su, tenin, you too. My child. It is a phrase that history has immortalized in its Latin form, et tu, brute. Then he fell, his body collapsing at the feet of the enormous statue of his great rival, Pompey. The ultimate, bitter irony. The 60 assassins stood back, breathing heavily, their bloody work complete. Silence, heavy and final, once more fell upon the room. With Caesar dead, the conspirators, led by a triumphant Brutus, marched from the Senate to the Capitoline Hill. They raised their bloody daggers and proclaimed the news to the city: liberty, freedom, tyranny is dead. They expected the people of Rome to pour into the streets, to shower them with flowers and praise them as saviors. Instead, they were met with an eerie, unnerving silence. The forum was empty. Doors were barred. Windows shuttered. The citizens of Rome, hearing of the violence, were not joyful. They were terrified. The conspirators had not liberated the Republic. They had simply proven that no one was safe. In their moment of triumph, they discovered their first profound miscalculation. The people had loved Caesar. Their second fatal mistake was allowing Caesar's loyal co-consul, Mark Antony, to speak at Caesar's public funeral. They believed it would show their confidence and magnanimity. They had no idea they were handing Antony the very weapon he would use to destroy them. Before the stunned and grieving crowd, Antony delivered one of the most masterful speeches in history. He began by acknowledging that Brutus and the others were honorable men. But then, with devastating skill, he dismantled their justifications. Point by point, he reminded the crowd of Caesar's victories, of the wealth he brought to Rome. He dramatically unveiled Caesar's mutilated body, pointing to each of the 23 wounds and naming the friend who had delivered the blow. His masterstroke was reading Caesar's will. It revealed that Caesar had left a significant sum of money and his private gardens as a public park to every single citizen of Rome. This wasn't the act of a tyrant, but of a benevolent father. The crowd's grief turned instantly to vengeful rage. They were no longer passive mourners. They were an avenging mob. Ripping burning branches from Caesar's funeral pyre, they stormed through the city, hunting for the assassins and burning their houses to the ground. Brutus and Cassius, the would-be saviors, were forced to flee for their lives from the very city they believed they had freed. The assassination did not restore the Republic. It shattered it completely, plunging Rome into 13 more years of brutal, bloody civil war. And from that chaos, the ultimate irony emerged. In his will, Caesar had named an heir, not Antony, but his sickly, unassuming 18-year-old grandnephew, Octavian. No one took the boy seriously, but Caesar had given him two things: his vast fortune and his even more powerful name. This boy, this unknown Octavian, would prove more cunning and more ruthless than any of them. He would raise armies hunt down and kill every single one of his adoptive father's murderers, and eventually defeat Mark Antony himself. He would stand alone as the sole master of the Roman world, and would take a new title, Augustus, the first true emperor of Rome. The conspirators had set out to kill a king and save the Republic, but in their fear, in their pride, and in their misguided honor, they became the Republic's executioners. Their daggers did not prevent a monarchy. They created an empire far more absolute than anything they had ever imagined. They killed the man, but in doing so, they ensured his legacy would become eternal. If this journey into the heart of a great betrayal has captivated you, subscribe to our channel for more of the stories you were never taught in school, and let us know in the comments. In the end, was Brutus a misguided hero or a tragic villain?